welcome to Church Online, Steamboat Christian Center. As you see, I'm loving the new beard. Okay, in Psalms it says, gray is the crown of glory. Yes. But hey, I know during this time, a lot of people, even without COVID, are hurting and going through difficult times financially, emotionally, spiritually. And so our benevolence account actually has been helping so many people. So if you want to give, the number's right below. Your giving can actually help someone get out of their trouble. Also, right now, I'm going to call Kyle because I think I want to start a watch party this Saturday at 6 p.m.
Getting a call. Yo, what's up?
Yo, this Saturday at 6 p.m. you gotta come to my watch party.
Okay, cool. Let me call Hadley 1 sec.
What's up?
Watch party, 6 p.m. Saturday night.
Cool, let me call Kaylin. What's up?
Jeff's inviting us to a watch party this Saturday night at 6 p.m.
Okay, let me call Blake.
What's up?
Jeff is inviting us to a watch party Saturday, 6 p.m. Let's go.
Okay, let me call Charlie.
Yeah! What's up?
Hey, Jeff's invited us to his watch party at 6 p.m.
Well, let me call Cade.
What's up?
Jeff's invited us to a watch party at 6 o'clock on Saturday. Wow!
Okay, let me call Julie.
What's up?
Jeff is inviting us to his watch party at 6 p.m.
Okay, cool. Let me call Amir.
What's up?
Jeff is inviting us to his watch party Saturday at 6 p.m.
Okay, let me call Pastor Troy.
¿Qué pasa?
Jeff está invitando a una fiesta el sábado a las 6 de la tarde.
What?
Jeff invited for the party Saturday 6 p.m.
Oh, okay. I'll see you then.
There is a song, I know it well, a melody that's never failed. On mountains high and valleys low, my soul will rest, my confidence in you alone. Hope has a name, his name is Jesus. My Savior's cross has set the sinner free. Hope has a name, his name is Jesus. Oh, Christ be praised, I have victory. See now the cross be lifted high. The light is come, the light is won. Behold the Christ. Hope has a name, his name is Jesus. My Savior's cross has set the sinner free. Hope has a His hope has a name, his name is Jesus. My Savior's cross has set me sinner free. Hope has a name, his name is Jesus. Oh, Christ be praised, I have victory. I'll see my pain no more, my fear will cease. I bow my life, I fix my eyes on Christ my King. I bow my life, I fix my eyes on Christ my King. And hope has a name, his name is Jesus, my Savior's cross has set this sinner free. Hope has a name, his name is Jesus. Oh Christ be praised, I have victory. And oh has a name, his name is Jesus, my Savior's cross has set this sinner free. Oh, has a name, his name is Jesus. Oh, Christ be praised, I have victory. Oh, Christ be praised, I have victory. Yeah.
Hey, gang, I am so glad that you could join us today. I'm really glad that you're with us. In fact, I was planning on starting a brand new series this week called Better. Yeah, better. Over the last few months, there's no doubt that we have all been through a lot. And we all have the choice. We can either get bitter about what has happened to us over these last few months, or we can get better. And I really feel like this is a good time for you and I to reflect a little bit on what we've learned over these last few months and decide, hey, what are we going to drop and let go of, and what are we going to pick up and carry forward with us? And so, I mean, it would be a shame to go through all of this pain without getting any gain. Ooh, I like that. Well, all this pain without any gain would be a shame. And so, I want to encourage you to join us next week as we start this brand new series and use this craziness that we've been through to become better. And so I hope you can make it. Today, though, I want to take a few moments to talk to you about where we are in regards of reopening our church, or maybe more specifically, re-engaging our church. Over the last month or so, and especially the last few weeks, I've ran into a lot of people who've been asking me the question, when are we going to be able to come back to church? And I totally empathize with that sentiment. I miss seeing all of you so much. I've been a pastor for almost 25 years, and one of the greatest joys of this work is meeting with people and connecting with people and walking with people on their journey with God. And going to church services is a big part of that journey. But this pandemic has clearly prevented us from being able to do some of the things that we want to do. And so when can we actually meet? I know that that's the big question, and I want to try to tackle it with you today. And so I hope you can hang with us a little bit on this. Last week, we hosted 3 Steamboat Christian Center family meetings here at the church to give people an opportunity to ask these kind of questions and to delve a little bit deeper and to talk about this very subject. And it was interesting listening to some of the stories and some of the testimonies that came out that night. I think one of the things that we all realized and recognized is that God, interestingly enough, is using this pandemic to do and reach a lot of people, And so I've thought about that this week, and in fact, one of my heroes, Winston Churchill, he had a quote that has been attributed to him, and I love it. He said, "We should never let a good crisis go to waste." And I think that that's true. And I think that God would definitely agree with that sentiment. In fact, in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, there's this interesting dialogue that the Apostle Paul tells us about, that 3 times he prayed that God would remove this painful situation, this painful circumstance that Paul had found in his life. And 3 times Paul pleaded with God to take this away. And it was interesting. God basically said, no, I'm not going to do it for you, Paul. And that just doesn't seem like the God that you and I serve. But listen to this. It gets a little bit deeper. In verse 9 of 2 Corinthians chapter 12, this is what God said to Paul. He said, Paul, my grace is sufficient for you. But here's the part I want you to get. He says, for my power is greatest when you are weak. It is in your weaknesses, it is in your troubles, it is in your trials and tribulations that my power is at its greatest. In other words, when things seem like they're out of our control, that's when God is most in control, right? And that's hard for us to remember, but I think that is definitely true in this situation. And to you and I, the church doors being locked due to this COVID-19 pandemic is a bad thing. We're like, man, I want to be back in church. I want to be with my people. But my question is what if God is using these circumstances for good? What if God is up to something in these difficult times? Well, I want to explore that with you. In fact, I want to share with you 2 things that I have noticed over the past few months that I believe that God has done that is good for the Church of Jesus Christ, that is good for His kingdom. One of the blessings that the church closure has led to, write this down, is that it has challenged believers to own their own walk with God. To own their walk with God. What am I saying? In my 25 years as a pastor and in ministry, I have noticed that sometimes we can, or people can kind of depend on church to fill that void that we have in our relationship with God. That we, kind of like we often go to church on Sunday, kind of like we're checking a little box to just say, okay, I've got the God thing kind of covered here, right? And we go to church and we feel better, on Sunday. We walk out and we feel a little more connected to God. But by Monday, we're back on our own. We're back to doing life on our own. And I have heard, and it's fascinating, over the last several months, I have heard from so many people that have told me that not being able to go to church has caused them to develop a stronger, more consistent relationship with God. They have had to develop personal study of His Word. They've had to get into His Word on their own. They've had to develop a more consistent prayer life where they're praying throughout the week instead of just waiting to go to church and hear the pastor preach to them the Word or hear the pastor pray for them. They've had to do it on their own. And look at this. In Luke chapter 9, verse 23, this is an interesting little statement that Jesus said, but I want this to get into your heart. Jesus said this, whoever of you wants to be my disciple, here's what you must do. You must pick up your cross daily and follow me. That's insightful. I think with our inability right now to come together in this church building, many of us have had to learn how to grow our daily walk with our God. And I think that is a fantastic thing. I think that's a healthy thing. And if you haven't experienced that, I encourage you, use this opportunity to strengthen your relationship with God. Number 2, another big blessing that I've seen that's come out of this is the success, or more specifically, the viability of online church services. Like many churches around the nation and the world, this lockdown basically caused us and forced us to have an online experience. It was the only way that we could connect with our congregations. And because churches were forced to go online, I would suggest to you that this past Easter, that more people this last Easter heard the gospel than in any other day in history. that more people were tuned in watching church services because of the circumstances and the fear that was surrounding the world, plus the accessibility of church, the ease of being able to go to church by watching it online, more people heard the gospel of Jesus Christ. I am believing for an incredible harvest over the next few years of souls that are going to come out of hearing those words that were spoken to them over those TV screens. And so the question is that I just wonder, looking back, I think that our church was especially fortunate. I mean, it's fascinating, but over the last few years, you've watched us add a few people to our staff, and most of these people, all of these people are multi-talented. We don't hire just one-trick ponies. We get people that are versed in all kinds of things, and people like Jeff Sublett and Blaine and Kyle and Hadley. You know what? All of these guys and gals have been a huge part of our church's growth over the last several years, but their skills with filming and editing and even acting have really shined over these last few months. I mean, many churches kind of struggled in transitioning to going online, but boy, these guys, that crew, were made for TV, man. I mean, just think about it. They were ready for this. And with, you add in Julie's creativity and Pastor Charlie's oversight and organizational skills, we have been able to create an excellent online experience week after week after week here in Steamboat. And I'm so proud of that. And so, without a doubt, the reach of our church has expanded exponentially over these last few months. You would have thought that the opposite have happened, but the fact is that our church has blown up. We now on average, about 600 to 2,000 devices tuning in every week to one of our services, one of our experiences. And you would consider that probably 2 to 3 times that many people are actually watching. You know, you get a family of 3 or 4 watching together. That's thousands. And it has expanded all over our valley, all over our country. Many of our second home openers, many of you are watching right now from Texas or New York or Florida. And we're glad that you can be a part of our church now year round. And we have discovered that there are people who weren't going to church before are now watching these services on a weekly basis. It blows my mind. Who would have ever thunk? Who would have ever thunk that if we allowed people to attend church from their homes in their pajamas, they might actually go to church more often? Amen? So it's been an amazing thing. And I think about this, that before COVID, most people in our church, most families who came to Steamboat Christian Center would come maybe once or twice a month. That was basically the average. And most of those folks feel like, boy, I'm committed to my church. But just because of life and where we live, that's the reality of it. One of the things that we have noticed is that people are connecting with this church every single week because of our online services. And in my opinion, that's a good thing. That helps us all stay on the same page and that we're all moving forward and that you don't feel lost if you've been gone for a couple of weeks. Look at this, Hebrews chapter 10, verse 25. The writer says this, "And let us not neglect meeting together as some people are in the habit of doing." It is our culture that we miss church. But he says, let us encourage one another, especially now that the day of his return is drawing near. In some ways, our church has become more consistently connected now than ever before, even though we can't come together. It's mind-blowing. And my thought and my commitment is that when we do open our doors again here at the Christian Center, no matter what, we are going to continue to encourage people to be a part of Steamboat Christian Center through our online experience, because this is a way for us all to move forward in a greater way. And so, with that said, the question still remains. When are we going to open the doors? And I got to say this to you real quick. The truth is that our doors are open. There are things that are happening here. It's very limited, but there are things that are happening at this church. Due to state and local regulations, we are currently limited to 50 people at one time in this building. And so we've been taking advantage of that over the last several weeks. We've had several meetings and several events here at the church. Last week we had 3 family meetings. I just mentioned that. We also had on Tuesday we had a big prayer walk in our Family Life Center from 7 to 7. People could come and go and be encouraged and pray and connect with God and get a little prayer guide. We were able to do that. Regen is meeting every Thursday night here at the church, and so if you're interested in growing and getting free of that thing that's held you back, I encourage you, not too late to jump in on that. Next month, we've got several seminars and teachings and even small worship experiences planned, and so we'll let you know about that. And so we're doing what we can do with the limits that they have given us. In fact, speaking of the limits, I've got an 11-page packet right here. This is our Re-Engage 3-step plan, and it includes all the restrictions and the requirements that our government has given churches to be able to meet in this current environment. And the first thing that you need to know is that the limit right now for churches is up to 50 people or 50% of your occupancy, whichever is less. And so that puts us, even though we could probably have 400 people in here at one time, we're limited to just 50 people. And so if we had a church service and you included our musicians and our host team and our staff, that would allow us to minister to about 35, 40 people at one time per service. Now, for most churches, this is great. That works perfect. It's doable. Most churches in America, the average church is less than 100 people. And so that works. But for Steamboat Christian Center, this is a massive challenge. We average anywhere from 600 to 800 people on the weekends. And in the summer, the numbers go even further because we have so many visitors that are coming that consider this their church home when they're here. And so the question for us is, how would we handle that many people? How do we navigate that? And like I said, it's a massive challenge. And we've thought of everything. We've thought about doing services in our parking lot here, and we've added it up. We've got about 60 parking spaces that we could do a service around there. And we figured that up. If we did 4 services, that would kind of probably reach about 250 people. But man, when we thought about that more, we realized our neighbors right next door probably wouldn't appreciate hearing all of that noise 4 times every weekend. And so we kind of backed off of that idea for a little bit. One of the things that we've done is that we've talked to and listened to churches all around the country, especially churches that opened up early and we're eager to jump together. And one of the things that we've discovered is that the results have been surprising. You would think and assume that once they opened up the church that over the next few weeks attendance would begin to grow. But it has actually been the opposite. What happens is that people come to church for a few weeks and then they're seeing that attendance starts to drop off significantly. In fact, many churches in Texas are beginning to close back up again because of this phenomenon and because of the rise of COVID cases. And you may go, why would that be? Well, I want you to imagine coming to church next week. And if we implemented the restrictions and the guidelines that the government has given, this is what your experience would be. You would pull up in the parking lot and you would get out of your car and you would be immediately waved over by one of our hosts that would be in a mask. And you would be instructed to walk into the church, single file, and go directly to the auditorium to find your seating spot. And you would be pointed to an area, and you and your family would be required and could theoretically sit together, but there would be a 6-foot barrier all around you that no one else could sit within. And so you would be about 6 foot in every direction from the nearest person. And there would be no kids ministry because we can't do that right now. And so your children would be working with you and sitting with you and listening, and you might or might not enjoy that experience, and they probably wouldn't enjoy it that much either. But everybody that would be in the building at that time would be wearing masks, and subsequently you would be unable to see if anybody was smiling. You might not even be able to recognize some of the people. And the musicians and the speakers that are up on the stage, they are required by the regulations to be 25 feet away from the nearest people. And so in this church, that would mean the first 6 rows of this church would remain empty. And then there would be no gathering before or after the services anywhere in this building. You would be asked to leave immediately. So partly to allow the staff to then go through and disinfect this entire place before the next group of 35, 40 people would come in. Now, I don't know about you, but how many of you, after doing that 2 or 3 weeks in a row, would begin to look at each other and go, you know what? I think I'd just rather stay at home and do church at home this week, because that's just not our vibe. And so I think that a more important question for us as a church, for Steamboat Christian Center especially, is that would you not only come to that, but would you ever invite a friend to come with you to that? My sense is probably not. No way. We would never let this be their first experience back in church. We would not do that. Because why? That is so far away from the things that we love about this church, that all of us, our first experience here was completely different. There was so much welcoming and love and hugs and high fives, and none that would be so far away from what our culture and our environment is. And it runs completely contrary to our mission as a church. I want to remind you that Steamboat Christian Center, that we are one of the few organizations in the world that exists primarily for the benefit of our non-members. We, a long time ago, set aside what we want in church because we wanted to reach our community with the hope and the joy of Jesus Christ. And this church exists for reaching those who don't know God or don't know about what Jesus has done. And so we would never invite them into that kind of environment. And so I think the thing is that it just wouldn't be the same. And until we feel that our church, and I've talked to the board, all of our elders, we agree that until our church can be the church that God has called us to be, where new people can walk in and be met with joy and with smiles and with a hug or a high five and be comfortable, we can give them cookies. Until we can do that, we're going to wait this out a little bit and watch how this develops. We're going to kind of pause and be slow in that. And so I know that some of you are frustrated hearing that, and I'm with you. In fact, one of the things that this brings up, one of the questions this brings up is, has the government overreached in restricting our ability to come together and worship in church? I think one of the questions I get is, hey, isn't it time that we start to rise up and we push back on this and begin to protest and rebel against some of these restrictions? And I'll tell you, I want to be honest with you. I have really wrestled with this. I love church. Church is my life. This isn't the same talking to an empty room. I miss y'all, believe me. And not only that, I'm an American. I love America. This is the greatest country in the world, and I love the freedoms that we get to enjoy, the freedom to come together and worship our God as we will. And I understand that if we don't value and if we don't stand up for some of the freedoms that we have, they will eventually be lost. And so I'm aware of that. But you know what? God recently reminded me that I have a dual citizenship. That's right. I have 2 passports that I get to carry with me everywhere I go. Yes, I am an American citizen, and I enjoy all the benefits and privileges and rights that come with that. I love my American citizenship. But I am also a citizen of heaven. And so are you. We are citizens. We are ambassadors sent from another place to represent God, to represent heaven to this broken and lost world. And we are here to help those people know about that. And in fact, my citizenship to heaven actually supersedes my citizenship to America. My citizenship to heaven often calls me to surrender my rights that I have and that I feel like I have in order to fulfill God's higher purpose and mission in my life. I don't always like that, but that's the reality, is that we are citizens of heaven first. And we need to look at this world and we need to look at these circumstances through that lens. And I think that as believers, especially here in America, we often confuse and combine our citizenship or our allegiance to our country with our allegiance to our Creator. And we need to be careful about that. We need to be careful about it, and it's a fine line. And I'm mindful that when I read the story of Jesus, when I read about how he lived his life and what he did when he was on this planet, I am mindful that Jesus ministered in an occupied country. Israel was occupied by a foreign entity. Rome was running Israel, and they controlled everything. They controlled the Jews' right to travel. They controlled their businesses. They controlled even the way they worshiped. And you know, worship was everything to a Jew. And the Jews were severely restricted in how and when and where they were able to worship God. And you would think that Jesus, a Jew, showing up on the scene, would have addressed that, would have pushed back on that. But the problem is I can't recall a single instance where Jesus called for protests, where Jesus called for rebellion against the government of Rome. I just can't remember it. In fact, in Mark chapter 12, verse 17, about the only comment he had on that, you might remember this. He said, he was asked about this, and Jesus said, hey, give unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and give unto God what is God's. And Mark says that his answer completely amazed everyone that was standing there. Why is that? Well, Jesus was letting them know, hey man, my mission isn't political. I'm not here to get into all the politics of stuff. My mission is spiritual. I have a higher calling, a higher mission. And it's interesting, in fact, some of Jesus' disciples were known as zealots. That before they started following Jesus, they were part of a group that were known as zealots. Zealots were patriotic Jews who were deeply passionate about getting Rome out of their world, getting that government system, that oppressive government system out of their lives. But I never once see Jesus giving Judas was a zealot. He never gave Judas permission to fight for his rights or to rebel against the Roman government. Instead, Jesus constantly called his disciples to a much higher and maybe even a more difficult mission: to love their neighbor as themselves and to share the gospel of heaven with the world. In the same way, I've thought about what our role as a church in this community is. And as much as I would love to make a statement about our rights being violated, I am not sure that God has given me permission to use this church for my political purpose. And so I am walking very carefully with that. And I hope you understand that. As citizens of heaven, my friend, our first responsibility is to honor God and to love God by honoring and loving the people that are around us. And one of the things that I've thought about is that these local government restrictions, I know this is true. They say that locally in Routt County, if we get 26 new cases of COVID-19 within a 2-week period, they say that the government will then increase the restrictions and send us back to where we were back in May. And boy, I'll tell you what, as much as I long to worship with all of you in this room together, as much as I want to get together and worship in this building like we did, I do not want to be a part of contributing to the possibility that some of the business people in our church and in our community might suffer because of those actions that we would take. Now, you may completely disagree with me on this, and I want you to know you're free to do that. That is okay. We don't have to be in total agreement here, but I will ask you that and remind you that love is patient. As the older I get, I'm reminded that love shows patience, and we need to be patient with each other. We need to be patient in these circumstances, and we need to patiently love our neighbors during this difficult time. Amen? That's my heart. And so, while we patiently wait and pray for more clarity and more consensus on what's going to happen and where we should go, what can you and I do in the meantime? Is there anything that we can do in the meantime that would be productive and maybe constructive to the mission that God has called us to build His kingdom rather than our own? What would that be? Well, I'm glad that you asked that question. A few years ago, I went to China. I know that that's not a good word right now in our country, but I visited China on a missions trip, and I was reminded of something that I had forgotten, that the Chinese symbol, the Chinese word for crisis, is actually a compound word. It's two symbols that have been meshed together. The first symbol is danger. That crisis, the first symbol in the word crisis is danger, and the second symbol is opportunity. And I love that thought because it is so true that whenever you and I go through a crisis, there is a very real sense that there is danger. This is new. What's going to happen? There could be problems. And so danger is a part of it. But it's also true that when we go through a crisis, that there are opportunities that we need to be aware of. I mean, how many of you wish that at the beginning of this whole pandemic, you had bought stock in Zoom, right? The online meeting thing. Right now, we would be very wealthy if we had done that. There was an opportunity in that crisis. Here's the thing about it. The COVID-19 crisis has provided our church, Steamboat Christian Center, with two huge opportunities that, my friend, I pray that we can take advantage of, that we can jump all over. Let me give them to you. Number one, the first one is, what can we do in the meantime? We can invite people to watch church. We can invite people to watch church. Because of our online services, it has never been easier to invite our friends and our family and our coworkers to check out our church. We're all proud of this church. We love it. We have all found so much life and joy and help in this family. And we've always looked at ways of how do I invite my friends to come check it out. And that's always an uncomfortable conversation. But it's never been easier than it is right now to just mention, hey, you know what? I've been wanting to invite you to my church. Why don't you go online and check it out and see for yourself if it might be something. Right? I think that you would love that. And one of the things we've discovered is that people love the anonymity and the safety of watching church online. Why? Because if they don't like it, if it's not a fit, if they get uncomfortable, then they can simply click off. It makes it so much easier than coming and feeling uncomfortable for that hour if they feel that way, that they can do that. And so that's one of the things. And here's the here's the thing. What we're hearing though is that there are a lot of you that have invited friends or family members that were not necessarily churchgoers to watch, and they've been loving it. In fact, I've talked to several of you who have told me that they have not only loved it, but they've invited their friends and their family members and their coworkers all across the country, all across the world. This is happening. It is the craziest thing. And I don't think that we've got something here that's super extra special. We've just got hope. We've just got joy. We've just got Jesus, and it's something that people are looking for in these difficult times. And so I love that. And so I highly encourage you to take advantage of this unique opportunity, this window that we have been given to invite your peeps to check out your church, to watch. Number two, the second opportunity is that I want to encourage you to invite people to a watch party. Now, I'll explain what that is in a second, but to be honest, I think what we all miss most about church isn't the preaching. As hard as that is for me to say, I know that that's not what we're all missing the most. And it certainly isn't the music, and it's probably not even the cookies, okay? Here's the thing. I think what we miss most about church is seeing our friends, seeing our brothers and sisters in Christ. I talk to you all the time, and people tell me, man, I miss seeing my peeps, man, my posse. You know, I miss seeing so-and-so. Have you heard from them? How are they doing? You know, I can't wait to be back in with my family. Well, here's a truth that I want you to understand, and that is this, is that even though we are restricted on what we can do in this church building, right? There's a limit on what we can do in having people gather here. You are not restricted. That's right. You are completely free to invite several of your friends over to your house and hang out at any time you want. And it's easy for you to perhaps maybe encourage them to come together and to do church, to pray and to worship and to fellowship if you want. For those of you that are missing that, you can do it. There's nothing stopping you. In fact, this is fascinating. This is the exact approach that the early church used to grow in the early days. See, they didn't have the benefit of some of these big buildings and auditoriums that we have. They met in homes. The early church met in homes. Acts chapter 2, verse 42. Look at this. It says this. They, the disciples, devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship, to the breaking of bread and to prayer. And they broke bread in their homes, and they ate together with glad and sincere hearts, praising God and enjoying the favor of all the people. And I love this last line, and it says, and the Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved. I love that. My friend, what if God was using and wanted to use this shutdown as a way to grow his church. I mean, it's just totally opposite of how we would have done it. But what if God has flipped the script and wants to use this to grow his church? What if God allowed the doors of this church to be locked shut so that the doors of our homes and our hearts might be open to our friends and neighbors? And that sounds like my God. That sounds like how he would do it. And so I want to challenge you with that. I want to encourage you to consider hosting a watch party at your house. Now some of you are saying, what is that? It's simply this. It's not regulated by anything. We're not overseeing it. It's just you, where you basically think about some of the church friends that you haven't seen in a long time. What would hold you back? Why wouldn't you just call a couple of them on the phone and invite them to come over to your house? You know, you could say something like, hey man, I don't know about you, but I am sick and tired of not being able to go to church anymore. And so what I've decided is we're going to have church at my house this weekend. Come on over Sunday morning, or maybe Monday night, or Thursday night, whatever is most convenient. I want to come over and we'll get together and we'll listen to the message. It'll be about 35 minutes and we'll hang out and then maybe we can talk about it and pray. If you want, you can go crazy. You can get some snacks and food. If not, just do it simple. Or if you want to take communion, you can do that and you can worship together with your brothers and sisters. It is so simple. This is what the early church is. It's so foreign to you and I because we're so used to coming to this building. But what if God wanted to cause us to go deeper in our relationships with our friends? You know what? And maybe you would be together and you're like, man, I can't do that every week. You know what? Maybe you would say, hey, what would someone else host next week? And we'll rotate and we'll just meet on this night. A lot of people are already doing it. I want to encourage you to do it. What we need and what we most miss is our connection to others. Why not throw a watch party? In fact, we'll help you. Pastor Kyle has put together a little one-page guide that can show you how easy it can be. I encourage you to go to steamboat.church/watch party. And you can check that out, get that information, and start one next week with our new series called Better. Well, hey, that's my challenge. So that's my heart today. I wanted to give you an update. I wanted to give you a sense of where we are in this process. But I'm believing that there's some opportunities that God has given us that I do not want to miss. And this is the great thing about our church, is that whenever there's been challenges in our church, whenever we've gone through difficulties, or we've had big mountains that we've been facing, we've always taken them on. We've moved forward, and God has honored us in that. And I just want to challenge you. Take a couple of baby steps and see what God will do with your obedience in that. I want to pray for you, and I'll close, and I hope to again see you next week for Better. Father, I thank you for Steamboat Christian Center. We love this church. We love this church. It has changed so many of our lives because of the friendliness and the hope and the joy that is in this place. And every week we almost took it for granted that we could come and splash around in the goodness that was here. And now that it's been kind of taken away from us, many of us are frustrated. But I pray that you would help us to flip the script, that we would say, you know what, that doesn't have to stop. We can still be with our peeps. We can still connect and love one another and love you in a smaller but yet equally effective way, God. Challenge us to see the opportunities. Yes, there is danger. Yes, there are problems around us. But help us as a church to move forward and see the opportunities and seize the day. And we will look back one day in the future and go, man, that was one of the greatest seasons that our church has ever had. That changed everything. That changed my life. Lord, I pray for those folks that are part of this church. I pray that you would bless them, those who are being faithful to this church, who are praying for their leadership, praying for wisdom. We don't have all the answers, but collectively, God, you speak through us. And I just thank you for the good things that are here. And I can't wait to see what you're going to do over the next couple of months in our church. We love you and we praise your mighty name. All God's children say, amen.
You are here, moving in our midst. I worship you, I worship you. You are here, working in this place. I worship you, I worship you. You are here, moving in our midst. I You are here, working in this place. I worship you, I worship you. 'Cause you are waymaker, miracle work, promise keep, light in the darkness, my God, that is who you are. You are waymaker, miracle work, promise keep, light in the darkness, my God, that is who you are. You are here, touching every heart. I worship you, I worship you. You are here, healing every heart. I worship you, I worship you. You are here, turning lives around. I worship you, I worship you. And you are here, mending every heart. I worship you, I worship you. Waymaker, miracle work, promise keep, light in the darkness, my God, that is who you are. 'Cause you are waymaker, miracle work, promise keep, light in the darkness, my God, that is who you are. 'Cause you are waymaker, miracle work, promise keep, light in the darkness, my God, that is who you are. 'Cause you are waymaker, miracle work, promise keep, light in the darkness, my God, that is who you are. And 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 that is who you are.
Miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness, my God, that is who you are. 'Cause you are waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness, my God, that is who you are.
Even when I don't see it, you're working. Even when I don't feel it, you're working. You never stop, you never stop working. You never stop, you never stop working. Even when I don't see it, you're working. Even when I don't feel it, you're working. You never stop, you never stop working. You never stop, you never stop working. Even when I don't see it, you're working. Even when I don't feel it, you're working. You never stop, you never stop working. You never stop, you never stop working. Even when I don't see it, you're working. Even when I don't feel it, you're working. You never stop, you never stop working. You never stop, you never stop working.